On the next episode of Natural Heroes,
we need to recognize the need for a new kind of allegiance, of patriotism, where we not only support our country, perhaps as a government, as a society, but we also support our country itself as the land that we walk on.
major funding for Natural Heroes is provided by General Hydroponics, bringing nature and technology together to feed a hungry world while protecting soil and water resources. The Keith Campbell Foundation for the Environment, KRCB, Public Television for San Francisco's North Bay. Green Tracks Network, telling stories that change the world. Additional support for Natural Heroes is provided by Temper of the Times Foundation, Left Foundation, and Environmental Media Fund.
We are on Kruzof Island, which is on the outer coast of southeast Alaska, near the town of Sitka. Kruzof is kind of a famous island because it's volcanic. The main part of Kruzof is volcanic. I'm Richard Nelson. I've lived in the Tongass National Forest for about 30 years. It's a funny thing for me. I remember reading as a young anthropology student about the Northwest Coast Indians, and for some reason, the people and the land of this coast just intrigued me. I was drawn to it. I remember I would draw in my margins of my notebooks little coves and anchorages and little cabin that I would imagine that I'd live in. And many years later, when I came here, it was as if I was coming home. The first time I ever saw this place, it just resonated all the way through my heart. This place is on the north end of Kruzof Island. It's called Kalinin Bay. It's a fantastically rich place, and we often run into brown bears here. We'll surely see some sign of them, and I think if we shouted loud enough right now, it's almost certain that a grizzly bear would hear us. I first came to Alaska in 1961 when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Wisconsin. I was part of a research project up on Kodiak Island. Came back in 1963 to work out in the Aleutian Islands on an archaeological project. And then 1964, 65, 66, lived in the Inupiat Eskimo village of Wainwright, way up on the North Slope, where my work was to learn how to subsist and survive on the Arctic ice. So when I was 22 years old, I had the chance to live for a year in an Eskimo community. learning how to live off the land and live off the sea ice. It completely changed the direction of my life. I fell in love with it, really in the way that you would fall in love with a person. And I think of it that way, that I'm married to this place. I've committed myself to it. I don't want to leave it or move away from it. The remarkable thing about these grizzly bears is that there are, on Baranof Island, between 1,000 and 2,000 grizzly bears. That's more grizzly bears than are found in the entire lower 48 states. On one island on the coast of southeast Alaska, if you looked at the map of Alaska, you wouldn't even notice this island. It's about 100 miles long, 25 miles wide at its widest place. That gives you an idea of the quality of wildness that exists here in the Tongass National Forest. It's why we're so passionate about protecting this place. I think once we set down roots somewhere, once we declare our allegiance and affiliation to it, something happens, I think, in us that makes us want to take care of the place. And so for me, conservation is just a way of trying to earn the right to live in this country that I love so much. We look at all this life around us, the forest and the birds and all that sort of stuff, and we don't stop to think that we're walking over a whole community of living things. It's rich with clams. There's probably millions of clams in this one tide flat, and worms and all sorts of little invisible critters. See, if you turn over stuff, see here, these are blennies. This is a little kind of an eel-like fish. Here's a hermit crab and the snails. For me, living from the land makes me feel much more deeply connected to this place. The fact that I get a lot of my food right here from the forest and the streams makes me feel deeply affiliated with it, makes me recognize that our bodies are made from what grows up out of this soil. That's where our food comes from, that's where the air comes from that we breathe, that's where the water comes from that we drink. So first of all, we must recognize that our bodies are in fact a part of this continent. We are made from the earth. That's what we grow up out of, just like these plants do. Look, here's a jawbone of a salmon. The adult salmon come up this stream from out in the ocean. They spawn up here in the stream beds, and they die. And their bodies fertilize the stream in which their own offspring will grow. So here are the adults nurturing the environment that their own offspring will grow in. But it goes farther than that. This salmon jaw here was up here on the tide flat. And the otters and the bears and the eagles and the gulls eat salmon that come into the stream. They drop salmon carcasses in the forest. They metabolize the salmon, and their own droppings are deposited here in the forest. And so the salmon from the ocean nurture the forest. And then the forest, in turn, is very important to the productivity of the stream. So the forest shelters the stream. The old trees falling into the stream create pools where the salmon can spawn. And so you have this beautiful reciprocity. One of the beautiful things about the Tongass National Forest is it's like a laboratory for us to understand how life works. I'm sorry we haven't seen bear sign yet, but I kind of think we will. This is the best spot I know of to see bats in this part of the world. For me, the most important part of my learning how to see the world is from living with Indian and Eskimo people and Alaska people whose senses are so acute to their environment. And I think from them, I learned a little bit about looking for the subtle cues around you and just learning how to look at a place and needle your eyes into all the little interstices of your surroundings, because people who are hunters, you know, traditional hunters, really know how to see stuff. We need to keep what we have here in terms of in the natural environment. We have to do everything we possibly can to preserve and protect this. And second, we have to do everything we can to preserve and protect and perpetuate indigenous knowledge. I'm very impatient with the ways that native tradition is being lost in Alaska, the fact that it's not regarded as equal with Western knowledge. We can't afford to lose this enormous, diverse, brilliant tradition of indigenous knowledge that exists in every part of Alaska. Every time an elder dies in a community, you're losing a volume in the encyclopedia. The interesting thing about these trees is they're very shallow roots. Their roots only go down, you know, a foot or two, because once they go any lower, they're just in the water. So they're on like pedestal roots. The winds here will blow 60, 80, 90 miles an hour. So how do these trees not blow over? I'll tell you what it is. The roots of all these trees are intertwined. And so each tree is holding the other trees up. That's what keeps these things from blowing over. And often when one blows down, then others will blow down. They've lost this support. It's a really wonderful metaphor of how each tree in the forest helps the others to stay standing. Now, Koyukon people who live up in northern Alaska also say that trees have a consciousness and a spirit, that every tree has its own power and its own spirit inherent in it, like a soul. And they would say that this tree knows that I'm leaning up against it. And who am I to say that it doesn't? How do we know? I mean, I think that we're taught in our Western culture to unbelieve. When we're kids, we think stuff around us has a consciousness and awareness. We personalize it. Each one is a being. Well, how do we know that's not true? It's much better to assume that there's a spirit inside every tree. It's much better to assume that it knows we're here. It's much better to assume that this tree has more power than I do. If we could get back to that, I think, fundamentally human way of understanding the world, because as far as I know, every indigenous culture in the world teaches this. If we looked at the natural world that way, or if we acknowledged even the possibility of that, think of how differently we would treat our environment. Think of how differently it would feel if I was making a decision to cut down this tree. Yeah, I use wood. We all use wood. There's nothing wrong with using wood. But if we would acknowledge this tree as a being, the gift of its life to us, when we chose to use it, now then you carry that idea further and say, who can make a decision to come in here and cut down every single tree in this forest? Which, isn't that the same as if you went into a city and you say, well, let's destroy this city block here and take away the home of everything that lives there? That's a really big decision. And what's the best way to measure that decision? Should it be done in terms of economics? I think it'd be much better to measure those decisions ethically. And I think those are the kind of lessons that trees can teach us. You know, we need to come to the forest ultimately to learn the biggest lessons in the world, you know, of who we are and how we fit into this community, and the fact that we're just a small little creature scurrying around in the shade of these bigger, older organisms. This is a salmon stream too here. This is the headwaters of a stream that'll come out on the beach where we're going, and it gets a nice run of pink salmon and chum salmon, and then in the fall the silver salmon cohos come in here. I'm wishing we'd see just a perfect bear track on this trail, but not yet. This is a place where we can bring our children to see America as it was before Columbus. We have an opportunity here to see for ourselves and to preserve for our children the world as it should be, the world as it's made, the world as it has existed for thousands and thousands of years without human intervention. It's like the baseline. If we want our children to understand what is our world like without us changing it, manipulating it, altering it, damaging it, we can bring them here, and they have this is the foundation. This is the bottom line to say, here is ultimately the real world. And that isn't to say that humans don't have a place here. Humans have lived here for many thousands of years, but they've done it in a way that kept it intact. They've touched this place gently, as indigenous people have done all over the world. It isn't that they don't change it, they do, but they change it in ways that aren't blatant and destructive. Everything is still here. In this environment here in the Tongass National Forest in southeast Alaska, every species of plant and animal ever known to have lived here is still here. And we're not going to let go of it. We're not going to let it be taken away from us. So the fact that we still are confronting industrial clear-cutting, the potential for massive loss of forest here in southeast Alaska is hugely consequential, because you don't have something like this anywhere else. We often hear politicians saying, well, we're not going to have any more wilderness designation. We're not going to keep industry out of these places. What they say is, we're not going to lock up any more land. Wait a second. This land is the opposite of locked up. This is public land. It's locked open. That's the beautiful thing about American public land, is the gate is locked open for all of us to come here, to fill up our hearts and souls with this beautiful place. What is locked up land? Private land, that's the ultimate lockup. We can't let the politicians get away with that twisting of the language. We need to stand up for this land. This is public land, belongs to every one of us. It's open land for us to come here. We need to protect that. We need to say, you're not going to take a piece of this away from me. I own it. And I think that's a big part of the endeavor of conservation today, is to say, one of the lines we're drawing in the sand is, you cannot take away our public land. Where in the world would you go for a more important classroom than one where you could teach your children where they come from? Oh, here, look! Look here.
Oh my God.
Oh no, that can't be a bear
That's
track.
a very big bear, isn't it?
Oh,
for here.
It is. That is. I'm
Yeah.
amazed it's that large.
That is awesome.
That's a huge bear. But I mean, that's as big a bear track as I've ever seen on cruise off. Look at those toes. Nice big bear that just walked along this trail ahead of us. Yeah.
That is a great paw. Look at that.
That's the front paw only. And that's each individual toe.
It's out looking for love right now. You know, I don't think we're going to get right with the environment unless it's, first of all, a spiritual endeavor. You know, I don't think we make the big decisions on the basis of our intellect. Or science helps, intellect helps, but spirituality is really where I think our deeper wisdom resides. And if we don't keep this godness for our children, how are we going to teach them about God?
Fly like a bird through the twilight sky with wings lighter than the air. Soar like a bird through the morning sky. The heart carries the weight of a prayer.
Everything that comes to us from the land is a gift, and then we have the responsibility to take care of it in turn. You know, when I think about what the Pledge of Allegiance means, you know, to me, I'm pledging allegiance to the American land. And part of that responsibility that I have in feeling my allegiance to this as a piece of American land is I need to stand up for it, help to take care of it. We need to recognize the need for a new kind of allegiance, of patriotism, where we not only support our country perhaps as a government, as a society, but we also support our country itself as the land that we walk on. So when I think now about patriotism, when I look at the American flag, for example, what I see is 50 stars, each one standing for another part of the American land. And that, I think, is the ultimate form of patriotism. For me, conservation has been an important way of recognizing how much I treasure democracy. I don't think I understood that until I became an activist and realized that every time we participate in the public process, every time we write a letter to a person in Congress, every time we testify at a hearing, every time we go to our city government to talk about how we think our public land ought to be managed in our town, those are all ways of engaging ourselves with democracy. A lot of people in other countries don't have that privilege. I think you never, ever let yourself lapse away into a sense of hopelessness. As long as someone is willing to stand up and speak, and as long as they're speaking truth from their hearts and they're saying something that makes sense, one person in a democratic society has power. I mean, look at that eccentric, oddball, hermit, social misfit character, Henry David Thoreau. Here's this guy living in Concord, and he's off there sometimes by Walden Pond writing words in his little notebooks and stuff. And maybe they thought he was an endearing, curious eccentric. He didn't live a long life. He died young. But what he was saying and the way he said it was filled with power. Henry David Thoreau, that man from Walden Pond and Concord, changed the course of human history. That one eccentric loner of a man. I don't think you have to look any farther than Henry David Thoreau to see what one person can accomplish. And it doesn't have to be the big organizer. It doesn't have to be the politician. It doesn't have to be the wealthy business person. By speaking and speaking and speaking and speaking and never stopping and saying this is what we believe in, not thinking that we're going to achieve our victory next week, but just being absolutely committed to the fact that we will not stop. The least we can do is give something back to the place that gives us so much. Just what we can see right here around us is so complex, no human being is ever going to come anywhere close to understanding it. I think as much as I'm fascinated with learning about it, I'm fascinated with the fact that you can never really know it. And I think moving through the mystery is the most beautiful thing of all.
Major funding for Natural Heroes is provided by General Hydroponics, bringing nature and technology together to feed a hungry world while protecting soil and water resources. The Keith Campbell Foundation for the Environment, KRCB, Public Television for San Francisco's North Bay. Green Tracks Network, telling stories that change the world. Additional support for Natural Heroes is provided by Temper of the Times Foundation, Left Foundation, and Environmental Media Fund. For more information about Natural Heroes, to purchase videos, or to submit your film, visit naturalheroestv.org or call 1-800-287-2722.